The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 147. The Wolverines fall to number 7 this week with another big home game against the Fighting Illini Sunday at Chrysler Center. That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On today's show, we have part 2 of our recruiting roundup for the football class of 2013. Recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog will join us on Michigan Gameday to discuss the 11 defensive commits from this class and give us his overall take on this highly regarded group of future Wolverines. Michigan basketball has just gone through what could be its toughest stretch of the season, and the pounding they took in East Lansing last week has raised some concerns about this team's toughness and whether the freshmen have hit the wall mentally and physically at this critical point of the season. There are 5 games left, with the big ones at home, so there will be ample opportunity for the Wolverines to finish strong heading into the Big Ten tourney and the NCAAs in March. Coach Barnes-Arico and the Lady Wolverines turned in a superb performance on Saturday at Chrysler Center against the Spartans in a 1-point win. In the process, they got the monkey off their backs and stopped the 12-game losing streak to their arch rivals. They are now 19-6 on the season and steaming toward their second consecutive NCAA tournament appearance. It was a great weekend in Ann Arbor with the 2 hoops victories and the rededication of Chrysler Center. Cassie Russell and a host of other former Wolverines were on hand to commemorate the event, as the program is once again reaching out and trying to re-establish a link with its glory days. There is even talk about something that could be in the works to re-establish ties with the Fab Five, but for now it is only talk. We'll have to see what Dave Brandon and Mary Sue Coleman have in mind, but whatever happens, it will have to include movement from the Fab Five, and most notably, some kind of public apology, we would think, from Chris Webber, if there is to be any event honoring the Fab Five as a whole. Hockey is coming off a bye week and will be in Columbus this weekend to wrap up the road portion of their schedule. The NCAA appearance streak looks to be coming to an end this year, but there is still pride to play for as this season of frustration winds down. Softball had another good weekend down in Florida, taking 2 of 3 in the FAU Classic in Boca Raton. They've moved up a notch in the polls to number 14, heading into this weekend's action. It was a heartbreaking start for baseball. The Wolverines opened the season in Berkeley against Cal and dropped 3 games in walk-off fashion. This weekend they'll travel to Port St. Lucie for a 3-game series against Fordham. More on all these stories is coming up later on Michigan Quick Hits. Fans are still buzzing about this second consecutive top 10 recruiting class put together by Coach Hoke and his staff. This week on Michigan Game Day, we'll be joined by recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog, and we'll focus on the 11 defensive commits in this class. That's next here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. With us today on part 2 of our 2013 recruiting roundup is Ace Anbender from MGoBlog. Ace, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back on, Mike.
Well, last week we had Coach Brown from the M Block on and broke down the commitments we had on the offensive side of the ball. Today, Ace and I are going to talk about the 11 commits who we expect to see on the defensive side of the ball. Ace, let's start with the defensive backs. Number one, let's talk about Rion Dawson. He's a cornerback, 6'2", 175 out of Trotwood Madison High School, Trotwood, Ohio. Originally committed to the Illini, brings height, quick feet, and good speed to the program.
Yeah, Dawson's he's a bigger corner. Michigan's been starting to emphasize that. You can see also when we talk about Channing Stribling, he's a guy who's in a similar mold where they're willing to take on sort of project guys who maybe weren't the highest rated players, but have this bigger frame where they can take on larger receivers, and Dawson certainly fits that mold. He's got a fair amount of work to do technically. But in terms of the physical ability, he's a very impressive athlete at 6'2". He was also a teammate of Mike McCray at Trotwood Madison High School, which is a powerhouse program, has given Michigan Roy Roundtree and Michael Shaw and Brandon Moore. And he really is just a very impressive athlete. He has improved a lot since his junior year. And even from last summer, he was competing with Channing Stribling at Michigan's camp for an offer. Stribling earned it over him last year in camp, but then by the end of the recruiting process, he improved to the point where Michigan thought he was willing to an offer and someone who they'd want to bring into the class. So he's a guy who's he's going to take a couple years probably to learn the finer points of playing corner, really make sure that he has the hits necessary when you're a player tall to be able to stick with receivers and man coverage. But if he's able to get that aspect of the game down, he's a very interesting prospect because of the size.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, coming in at 175 pounds, 6'2", that's already a decent-sized corner.
Absolutely. He's a guy who's going to be able to probably get stuck out there. On the field side, Michigan does make that differentiation between field corner and boundary corner. Sorry, he'll be on the boundary because that's where you need somebody who can hold up and run support a little bit more because you've got teams running right at you off the edge. And he's got the size to be able to do that, and a lot of the corners on Michigan's team right now don't. So he's a guy who it'd be nice if he was seeing the field down the road because he does add something that a lot of guys on the team don't at this point.
Well, the next kid is another Ohio player out of Avon High School, Avon, Ohio, Ross Douglas. He's 5'10", 180 pounds. He's an early enrollee, so he gets to participate in spring practice. Good technique, might even help some people say this fall at nickelback, and he was originally a Penn State commit. Your thoughts on him?
Douglas is a very interesting prospect because he pretty much all the reviews from him, both in high school and when he would show up at camps, was that he was one of the best cover corners on the field every time he went out there. And if he was just maybe a couple inches taller, he'd really be up there with some of the elite prospects. He's got really quick feet. He's got great coverage skills. He can get up and jam guys in the line. And that sounds like for a guy who's got that level of coverage skills but is a little bit undersized, he seems to be a perfect fit now where, I mean, most every college football team at this point has to roll with three corners basically starting. Nickelback is really its own position now. And he fits that very well. It won't matter as much with him being in the slot. If he's a little smaller, you want a guy who's going to be able to stay with quick slot receivers. He's definitely that player. So he seems to have, among the defensive backs that Michigan brought in, one of the more obvious roles that he'll be able to step into right away. And with Courtney Avery's kind of up and down play a little bit, he's got some back problems. It's possible that Douglas is able to come in and contribute pretty early on because they might need him. He
is really a solid open field tackler. At least he was in high school.
Absolutely, and you don't see that all the time from high school players in the defensive backfield. That's something that usually comes along later. With Douglas, it really is. He's got a very complete package of skills. There's not a lot that he is really deficient at. It's really just a matter of he's maybe a generous 5'10" a little bit, and that's where he's limited a little bit positionally. You're probably not going to want to put him certainly not on the boundary where teams are going to run at him, and out on the field, that's where other teams tend to throw their best wide receiver, and those tend to be the biggest wide receivers. So we'll see. It seems almost certain that he'll end up covering slot receivers, but it seems like he could be very good in that role.
Well, the next player on our list here, Ace, is from that Cass Tech pipeline. Needs to get bigger, 5'10", 159 pounds. That's Jordan Lewis. Great feet, highly regarded for his technique. Usually times out, they say, in the 40 at around 4.5, and he was a four-star kid. Good-looking player from a great program.
Yeah, and I got to see Jordan Lewis several times over the last 2 years, both in game and camp settings, and he jumped out to me as early as his junior year when he was lining up across from Terry Richardson, who's currently playing cornerback at Michigan. And Lewis came off to me as the better prospect. And now he was also getting targeted with the ball a lot more because Richardson had the reputation of being a lockdown corner. But Lewis, he's a little bit bigger than Richardson. He's still a very skinny kid, but he's got a little bit more height to him. He's going to need to add some pounds, but he's got fantastic ball skills. When the ball's in the air, he knows how to get his body to it and make a play on it, and he's got soft hands too. He could probably have come in and been a pretty interesting wide receiver prospect as well. He's a very, very impressive athlete. You mentioned the 4.5 speed. He's very fast in a straight line and also a relatively agile player. One area where he actually gets himself into trouble with that is, at least at the high school level, he had a bit of a habit of relying a little bit too much on his recovery speed, maybe trying to bait quarterbacks a little bit into throwing the ball his way and then making up the ground and making a play on the ball, where you can do that against high school quarterbacks where they don't have the strongest arms in the world. And when you get to college, you can't afford to play like that. So he's going to have to make a few stylistic changes to his game. But the physical tools are all there as soon as he had some strength. And his football ability, I mean, at Cass Tech, he was making plays as a cornerback, as a wide receiver, and as a kick returner. He was a huge impact on the game in all three phases. So I think he's going to find a role somewhere at Michigan that could even be as a kick returner early on. But he's probably the most talented cornerback prospect in this class. And while he may not see the field right away, he seems like he has the best shot to start at one of the outside spots down the road.
Well, the next kid on our list is one of Jordan's teammates out of Cass Tech, Delano Hill, 6 foot, 198 pounds, so he's a bigger kid. 2-year starter at Cass, which was one of the best defenses in the state. They won the last 2 Division I state championships. He was originally an Iowa commit. Very interesting player.
Yeah, Hill was a guy who, like I said, I've seen Cass Tech a lot in the last couple of years. This is an understandable place to go. And with Hill, because he was an Iowa commit for so long, he wasn't a guy who I always focused on that closely when I was watching Cass Tech play, because they had, seemed like a dozen Division I prospects out there that Michigan had a shot at. But every time I watched them, it was impossible not to notice Hill, because he was always coming up from the secondary and making tackles at the line of scrimmage. And you just heard his name called, it seemed like 10 times plus every single game, where he was always involved in tackles, getting up and making plays in the secondary. He's a guy who's got a really good nose for the football. He's a very sure tackler, which is something you don't always get at the high school level, even among guys who are reputed hard hitters. And he's got relatively good form. He's got great closing speed from the secondary. His coverage skills, when he went to camps, he actually had, I believe at the opening, an elite prospect camp out in Oregon. He had one of the 5 or 10 fastest 40 times at this very elite camp. And that wasn't something that he didn't have the reputation as a speed guy. He was more a run support safety, but he's got some very impressive physical tools. He ended up as a 4-star on every site for the ESPN. So he could be a guy who is flying a little bit under the radar right now, especially with DeMonte Thomas also in this class, but could be a guy who starts down the road and is very, very solid. Michigan hasn't always had the best safeties and run support, and he could be a guy who provides that, which is very nice to have coming from the back end of your defense.
Well, and you mentioned DeMonte Thomas, 6'2", 192 pounds, another nice-sized kid we're bringing in from Marlington High School in Alliance, Ohio. He's another one of the early enrollees. He also played some linebacker and running back at Alliance, and the reputation is he is a hitter.
Absolutely, and with Thomas, what you're getting is probably the best athlete in the entire class. You mentioned he was a running back in high school. Not only was he a running back, he probably would have been the best running back in Ohio's 2013 class if he had decided to stay on that side of the ball in college. He was remarkably productive in high school. He was also an all-state baseball player, and he's considering playing baseball at Michigan in his spare time. He's just an athlete. And then you go and you watch his tape, and you realize that he's also a very, very skilled football player. I mean, this is a player who, like I said, probably could have been a very highly regarded running back prospect. And at the time he committed to Michigan, that was a major need in the class. And yet nobody really questioned that he decided to play safety, and that's because when you see him play, he can make plays all over the field. He's got the speed to cover the field sideline to sideline. Like you said, he hits very hard. He's a guy you don't want to run into. And he's also he didn't get to show off his coverage skills as much because of the way his high school used him kind of as a safety who was playing in the box and sometimes even down at linebacker. But he comes out at camps and he's got those skills. So I think about as complete a prospect as you're going to find coming out of high school. In terms of an athlete, he's probably the best one in this class. I don't think any. It's nice to finally be able to say from Michigan, from a defensive standpoint, that I don't think any freshman is going to have to step out and immediately from high school and start. But if there's a guy to do it, it's DeMonte Thomas, given that Michigan's going to replace Jordan Kovacs. And even though they have some proven guys at safety, he might be talented enough to just immediately step on the field. He was an early enrollee. He might just force his way onto the field right away just based on sheer talent. Now, it'd be nice if Michigan didn't have to do that from a team standpoint, but if there's anyone who's going to be able to do that from this class, it's DeMonte Thomas.
Yeah, he's a good-looking player, and what I like about him best is he sort of brings that linebacker mentality to the secondary with how aggressive he is and how physical he is.
Absolutely. He's got the mentality where he chose defense over offense. He likes to hit people. So that's you like that in the safety. You like that linebacker mentality. He's going to be a guy who provides an intimidating force from the back end, where running backs are going to be aware of him. Receivers crossing the middle are going to be aware of him, and that always adds a different element to your defense that can really take it to a different level.
Well, it was a big haul back in the secondary, and the last of those kids is Channing Stribling, another rangy guy, 6'2", 170 pounds, Butler High School, Matthews, North Carolina. Was a Michigan camper who had a strong showing, I guess, is what got everyone finally interested in him. He, of course, has to get bigger. He was a 3-star. What are your thoughts on him, Ace?
He's an extremely interesting prospect. Stribling, like I said, he earned an offer at camp. He came in as a completely unknown guy, was deciding whether he wanted to practice at camp as a wide receiver or a cornerback, and made the right decision, obviously. Earned his offer at cornerback over among several other more highly regarded prospects at the time, Rion Dawson, who, of course, ended up in the class. But Stribling, and then Stribling went out in his senior year and went from a guy who was completely unknown to just making a ridiculous amount of plays for a very large program in Carolina, a team that made a deep run in the playoffs. He would show up every game. It seemed like every game he was getting a receiving touchdown, an interception return for a touchdown, and a kickoff return for a touchdown. He was just putting up absurd numbers, having an impact on all three phases of the game. He's a very good athlete for a guy his height. Not a lot of players at 6'2" have the fluidity to play cornerback, even at the high school level. So for him to be able to do that and earn an offer at the position from camp, it makes him a very interesting prospect. I was surprised that he didn't rise more in the rankings late, considering how strong of a senior season he had at a very large program that plays good competition. But he's a guy who's going to need some time. He's obviously got to put on weight. He's going to have to learn the finer points of playing corner a little bit. But in a few years, he could be a guy who ends up being a major playmaker in the secondary because he has a nose for the football. He knows what to do once he gets his hands on it. And if he can develop those cover skills, it's going to be very hard to throw on a 6'2" corner.
Well, Ace, that's six players we brought in the defensive backfield. All in all, when you grade them out, do you think this is a really, really good class?
Yeah, I would say the one thing it's missing is a truly elite cornerback prospect. But that's also it's tough to pull in one of those every year. I mean, that's asking a lot. And when you've got Jordan Lewis, who was consensus around top 100 guy, an All-American, 4-star across the board, and also a guy from in-state, you can't complain too much about that being the top corner that you bring in your class, especially when you bring in a solid nickel guy like Douglas, and then two projects who, both of the odds of both of them panning out might not be that high, but the odds of one of them panning out are relatively decent. And then you've got one guy probably at each position, Field Boundary and nickel, coming out of the same class. And then when you add in the safeties, Thomas is probably my favorite prospect in the entire class. I think it's going to be pretty tough for him to miss at the college level, and Hill's a very good prospect too. It might not be an A-plus or even an A class in the secondary, but I think at worst you're giving it A-minus, B-plus. It's a very strong haul, and it's got, you like having the depth in numbers at a position like cornerback.
Yeah, and the best part is, other than DeMonte Thomas, we really don't need any of these guys to step in this year.
Not at all, and they might not even need Thomas. So that's a really good sign for the program moving forward. It'd be great to get redshirts on all these guys and let them develop as much as they can.
Well, as far as the linebackers go, Ace, we only brought in two this year. The first was Ben Gedeon, 6'3", 215 pounds. He's out of Hudson High in Hudson, Ohio. He had offers from Ohio State, Penn State, and from the Spartans. And a lot of folks down in Ohio think he was maybe the best linebacker coming out of the Buckeye State this year.
Yeah, and not only the best linebacker, one of the better athletes in general. He played a lot of running back at Hudson. He was a two-way player for them, a very productive running back, and what everyone described him at the high school level was a freak athlete, a guy who could cover the field sideline to sideline, be a big play guy, running the football. And he's not the biggest guy. He's probably coming in at around 220 pounds or so. So he's almost still a lock to redshirt, especially with the linebacker haul that Michigan brought in last year, and the depth that they found at that position. But he'll be a guy who probably, he's going to stick on the interior. He'll be either a middle linebacker or a weak side linebacker. Given his size, probably a weak side linebacker. But he's very good against the run. He's got great instincts. He's going to have to develop a little bit in coverage, which is interesting because he's got all the athletic skills you need there for him to be a good cover guy. But that was an area that was pointed out as a bit of a weakness when he was in high school. But other than that, he's impressive against the run. He's got great football instinct, and he's a heck of an athlete. So, given time to redshirt, he's a guy who's going to become a factor at that weak side spot probably in the next few years as soon as the guys in front of him clear out. And he's a very interesting guy at linebacker who could probably, like I said, cover the field sideline to sideline, and you really like that from a linebacker. So I think he's a good prospect, and his athleticism especially is something that could be, it's something you don't find a lot in a linebacker who's got his kind of a frame where he could possibly bulk up to 240 pounds, 250 pounds, and still be one of the faster guys on the field. So I really like that pickup. They got him early on. They turned down some impressive linebacker prospects because they landed him and McCray, and that says something, that they were turning away guys like E.J. Levenberry and Dorian O'Daniel, two well-regarded 4-star prospects, because they had their guys that they'd identified, and Gideon's one of them, and that says something coming from this coaching staff.
Yeah, it really does. And the other guy, Mike McCray, 6'4", 230 pounds, already a big kid out of Trotwood Madison High School, Trotwood, Ohio. He was a teammate, as you mentioned earlier, of Rion Dawson at Trotwood. His dad played for Ohio State. We all know that. He had offers from Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Purdue, another very athletic linebacker that covers from side to side very well.
Absolutely, and he's another guy who also plays with very good instincts. And unlike Gideon, McCray's a big guy. He's not the 6'3" or 6'4" that was being reported. When he signed, he's probably closer to 6'1" or 6'2", but he's very solidly built at this point, up around or even over 230 pounds. And he's sliding into the one linebacker spot that Michigan didn't really cover in the 2012 class. And that's on the strong side, where the spot that Jake Ryan currently occupies, where you want a guy who's a little bit bigger, able to handle going up against a tight end and rushing a passer, even taking on a tackle or two every once in a while. And McCray can definitely do that. He played in the middle in high school, which is where you want to stick your best linebacker in high school. And what he really impressed me with was, you see a guy his size and you expect him to be playing downhill against the run, laying on hits. And he was doing all of that, but he was also going out. He had 5 interceptions as a junior, and he returned 3 of them for touchdowns. He was just able to make some plays that you wouldn't necessarily expect from a guy who's that big at the high school level. He maintains an impressive amount of athleticism. So McCray, and he comes from a big program, and he's experienced at the high school level. He played a lot. He played both ways. So he's a really good athlete. I like him down the road coming at that strong side spot. He could even slide over the middle if they ask him to, although I think with the depth there, they won't need him to. But he's a very strong prospect over there. If he can add some pass rushing moves to his repertoire, he could be a pretty high impact guy over there. At worst, he's a pretty strong player, run support, who's got the size to really hold up in the Big Ten.
Our guest today is Ace Anbender, who's the recruiting analyst for MGoBlog, joining us on part 2 of our 2013 recruiting roundup shows. Ace, let's move to the defensive line, where we added 3 players, and we're starting to add the depth there that Coach Madison wants. The first kid I want to talk about is Maurice Hurst, 6'2", 305 pounds, a big kid out of Xaverian High School in Westwood, Mass. He's the son of former Patriots cornerback Maurice Hurst. He's explosive. They say he has great feet for a big guy. Had offers from Ohio State, Michigan State, Nebraska, and Purdue. He is a good-looking player.
He is, and I mean, one of the most impressive things about his film was the fact that he was able to line up a running back in high school at 275 pounds when he was a junior and 300 plus when he was a senior. And he has quick feet. He looked like an interesting. I mean, he's not a viable running back prospect at the college level, but in high school he was. Nobody could tackle him, and he really does have very impressive, really shocking athleticism for a guy who's that big. To see him on film, it's fun to watch. So he'll be a guy. He gets a good burst off the ball, and he's more of a. He'll end up probably at nose tackle. Michigan's going to need him there, given their depth at the position. He's going to end up at nose tackle with his size, but he's not going to be kind of a Will Campbell-like space eater out there. He's going to be a guy who slashes into the backfield, is disruptive, might be able to get a bit of a fast rush and knock down some running backs in the backfield. And that seems to be the directions Michigan is going with all of their defensive linemen, really. That's been a big focus with the guys they're bringing in, even with a guy like Andre Pipkins in the 2012 class. He may be a really big guy, but they wanted him because he was so athletic for his size and able to get into the backfield. So Hurst is in that mold. He doesn't have the just otherworldly talent that Pipkins had, but I think he might even be a little underrated considering he came out of Boston is not exactly a college football hotbed. It's not the most scouted place out there. And when Hurst was invited, when Hurst ended up at the Semper Fi All-American game, he was one of the best players on the field in that game. He really stood out. So we'll see. He might have even been slept on a little bit. And you like saying that about a guy who's still got majority four-star ratings.
Yeah.
So he's I like bringing in a guy who's that good of an athlete at that size. With Michigan taking a few guys like that, even if just one of them works out, you're getting a really intriguing player when you get a guy who can move like that, who's that big.
Oh, yeah. He really is shockingly agile for a guy that big. You know, a lot of times coaches say, when you look at a kid that's 305 pounds, there's good weight and bad weight. Is he the kind of kid who's maybe carrying a little bad weight right now, though?
Almost certainly. You almost never get a player coming out of high school who's 300 plus, and it's the kind of body that you're going to want at the college level.
Yeah.
So he probably is going to have to, his freshman year, come in and redistribute some of that weight. But he certainly, I mean, he maintained a lot of athleticism. He didn't look to be ballooning up to a size where he really needs to shed 30 pounds as opposed to 15 or 20, and which can make a big difference in your freshman year when you're still also trying to absorb the playbook and learning technique and just getting used to college life. So he definitely is going to have to do some work in the weight room, but I don't think he's got too long to go before he's able to see the field.
Well, the next kid is Taco Charlton. He's rangy, 6'6", 249 pounds. He really looks strong. He's out of Central Pickerington, Ohio. Grew up a big Buckeye fan. He's another one of the 6 early enrollees on campus now, and he's considered a very strong pass rusher, very good-looking player also.
Yes, and Taco was a kid who I was able to go out and see last fall, and when I went to see him play actually against Michigan tight end commit Jake Butt and Pickerington North, my expectation was I was going to see, his reputation was as really a pass rushing specialist. And when I went down there, Pickerington North had a running back, Godwin Igwebuike, who ended up committed to Northwestern, was a 4-star on at least a couple of the sites, and a guy who I thought if Michigan didn't get Derek Green should have gotten an offer. And so Charlton's assignment for most of the night was to keep tabs on Igwebuike and really stay home against the run, and he did a remarkably good job of it. He was very disciplined. He ended up with 10 tackles and still was able to get into the backfield for, I believe, 1.5 sacks in that game. He's really explosive off the line of scrimmage. His reputation from camps was that he could beat anyone in the country off the edge, and he showed that on the field. He's got a great frame for a defensive end. He's very thick in the lower body, where you can tell he's got the frame to add. He could probably get up. He says he's up already to around 270 pounds. I think he could get up to stay in that range or even get up to around 280 while still maintaining a great deal of his athleticism. And then you really talk about him being kind of a nightmare coming off the corner and figuring out how to block him. And with the great strides he made in terms of his football IQ and his run support, he is a guy who I think is going to come in. He might not play right away, but Michigan doesn't have a really settled situation at weak side defensive end where he's expected to come in. So he could possibly see the field a little bit this fall if they need him to get out there, if they have any injuries. He's going to be one of the first guys in this class who gets the red shirt pulled. And I think he's earned that with his play, especially his senior year. He really broke out. So we'll see. He's one of the prospects I think has the best chance to really live up to his recruiting reputation and possibly even exceed it.
Well, the last of our 3 defensive line commits, Henry, is it Poggi?
Poggi, I think.
Poggi, okay. Well, he's a kid we've heard a lot about through the entire process. 6'4", 260 pounds, played at Gilman School in Baltimore, Maryland. He made everyone a little bit nervous the last week or so before commitment day by visiting Alabama, and he, of course, explained why he was doing that. His dad was his high school coach. He's a very, very highly regarded, polished-looking player.
Yes, I think that's the thing that really jumps out about him first and foremost. You mentioned his father was his high school coach. He has 2 older brothers who played at the Division I level. He really is. You see the way he uses his hands, his footwork. He's really his ability to stay low. He's a very technically polished defensive lineman. He was extremely highly regarded, especially his junior year, because of how technically advanced he was. I believe even at the end of the recruiting cycle, Tom Lemming, who does his own ranking, still had him among the top 15 or so prospects in the country, which I think was more a product of how he was regarded earlier in his career. But and what's holding him back from being that really elite level prospect is his size at this point. He's 6'3" and probably about 260, 270 pounds, so you're going to want to see him and he doesn't necessarily have the pure explosive athleticism to get off the edge and be a defensive end. So for him to be a defensive tackle, he's going to need to bulk up a fair amount. And then you have to see how he maintains his burst off the line and everything when he gets to that. But in terms of technical ability coming out of high school, you're not going to find many guys more polished than him. And he'll line up at free tech for Michigan, and he's another guy who can penetrate into the backfield. But the way he uses his hands, he's very good at beating guys pretty clean off the line of scrimmage. He's not always as strong when he has to head up and take off a double team, pushing guys around. He'll develop that when he gets into the weight room. But he's a player who can get into the backfield. He can rush the passer a little bit. He's also good against the run. He had strong performances in his All-American game appearance in the Under Armour game, and I think he's going to need some time in the weight room. But after that, his technical ability really puts him in front of most of the guys his age, where he could possibly see the field earlier, just because he's not going to have to work so hard on that aspect as other freshmen.
Ace, do you think there was any real chance during the last week or so of the recruiting process that he was thinking about flipping to Alabama, or do you buy what he said about just visiting a friend down at Alabama?
I think there's some truth to both sides. I'd be surprised if he wasn't at least considering Alabama. They were his other top school when he chose Michigan. It's Alabama, obviously, and they're winning a lot of national titles these days and recruiting pretty well. So I think there was some truth to that. Who knows what would have happened if Alabama actually had room for him. They did not. And so that was why I don't think there was as much reason for concern as there was during the last week of the recruiting cycle, just because no matter how you looked at it, Alabama didn't have room to take him in the class. Did he consider him? Possibly, but I don't think it was necessarily that much of an option. And the way it ended up, he still ended up in Michigan, so it's not something I concern myself too much with at this point.
Well, Ace, it was only 11 commits on the defensive side of the ball. Might be short on numbers this year, but I think the one thing we have to say is, for the most part, Coach Madison and Coach Hoke met their needs, some really pressing needs, and added some really nice depth to the class.
Absolutely. I mean, the only spot that you'd really say they didn't fill is strong side defensive end, and they brought in 3 guys, I think, who could play that position in the class prior. So in terms of loading up on depth, especially for a class of only 11, they really hit everything. So you're getting the depth you need in the secondary. You're getting a couple of guys who can make an impact at safety. The 2 linebackers fill 2 different needs, and coming off an extremely strong linebacker class in 2012. And then you're adding depth on the defensive line, and especially in Charlton, I think you're getting a guy who Michigan hasn't really had a high-impact pass rusher off the defensive line in a long time. And he could really be that guy who could get double-digit sacks in a season down the road while playing defensive end. Michigan hasn't had that. And you're getting, with DeMonte Thomas, you're getting a guy who could be a really high-impact safety, who's not just a guy who's solid back there and not giving up big plays, but a guy who's getting all over the field and making plays. So I think other than strong side defensive end and maybe a top flight corner, there's not a lot you can complain about with this defensive class.
Well, Ace, last week we did the offensive breakdown. Of course, today we've been talking about the defensive commits, but there are a couple other players I wanted to get your take on. One of those is someone we don't talk about a lot, the long snapper, Scott Sipniewski, 6'1", 230 pounds, out of Marquette High School in Ottawa, Illinois. We've heard he takes lessons since 7th grade at the Rubio Long Snapping School, and I know people get a little edgy when you talk about giving a scholarship to a kid who's just a long snapper. But for Coach Hoke to do that, this kid must be pretty darn good.
Absolutely. With Sipniewski, I mean, you're getting a guy who's very, very polished for a player his age. He's been focused on the long snapping aspect since middle school, and that, I mean, you want a guy who's not going to make any mistakes there. You hope. I mean, no knock against Sipniewski, but I think Michigan fans are hoping that he gets on campus plays, and yet we still never hear his name again. He should be able to come in, compete for that long snapper spot, and I would assume, given the fact that they're handing him a scholarship, he'll be able to see the field, possibly relatively early. The size doesn't matter as much with a long snapper just because you're not even allowed to hit him right off the snap. So it's really all about his ability to snap the ball to the punter. He's shown at the high school level that he's one of the best guys in the country at that. So if you're going to use a scholarship on a long snapper, he's one of the guys you're going to use it on. He brings somebody to this class. I mean, Michigan has the scholarship room anyway, so I had no problem taking him at least by the end of the class. Early on, I was a little nervous about choosing a spot on a long snapper there if you're cutting out an impact prospect in another position, but that ended up not being the case, and the coaches probably knew that early on. Like I said, you hope he comes in, and if he does his job, you're not going to really know how to pronounce his name because you're not going to have to.
Preferred walk-ons, those are players we don't talk about a lot, but there was a name we're all familiar with, Jack Wangler, son of John Wangler, of course, who played at Warren De La Salle, at least his senior year with Shane Morris. Do you think he has an upside and has the ability to maybe play at Michigan? It's
possible, especially at wide receiver, where Michigan has not necessarily recruited as well there as they have at other positions. He's got a decent-sized frame for a college receiver. He's certainly not taking himself out of the equation just based on his body type or anything. One thing he very much has going in his favor is his familiarity with Shane Morris. That Michigan is certainly expecting him to be the quarterback of the future, and Wangler's been catching passes from him for a while now. And especially when you got Morris is a lefty, he throws a ball that some guys aren't used to catching. Wangler's used to that. So that might only be an advantage for the first year until everybody else gets a chance to catch passes from Shane Morris too, but at least gives him a little bit of a leg up. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be tough for a walk-on to see the field at any spot, especially with the way Michigan is recruiting, but if there's a spot to do it, it's wide receiver. Wangler, he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's got his father who's certainly going to be able to help him through what it's like to be a football player at Michigan. So we'll see. He could be a guy who sees the field. He may be a guy who contributes on special teams. But if I had to guess, he'll find some role for himself. It may be small, but he'll find a way to get himself on the field.
Ace, any other interesting players you've heard talked about as preferred walk-on candidates?
J.J. McGrath, the kicker, is the other one that I would mention, is being brought in, and he's got a huge leg. He was vying for state records. I think he set some state records for longest field goal. He was kicking them up to about 57 yards and hitting several 50-yard field goals both in his junior and senior years while being quite accurate. Now, in high school, you're allowed to kick off a tee, which changes things, but he still has a very strong leg. He was booming kickoff. Almost all of his kickoffs went for touchbacks in both his junior and senior years, so he could come in and even compete for that kickoff specialist spot, and then when Brendan Gibbons leaves, Matt Wiles probably got the inside track on taking over for Gibbons for a year. But after that, the competition's wide open. McGrath is definitely a player who's going to compete for that starting place kicker job. He could even be a punter prospect as well. He's done both. So that was a pickup to get that guy as a preferred walk-on. He was the best kicker in the state for a couple of years and definitely has more than enough leg to play at the college level. So he I thought was a very nice pickup to have, who's not taking up a scholarship right now, and then he'll have a chance to earn one, he was told, once Gibbons graduates after this season.
Well, our guest on the show today has been Ace Anbender, who's the recruiting analyst from MGoBlog. And Ace, as always, the recruiting season, it never ends. Right now we're already starting to think about 2014, but all in all, wherever the experts rated this class 1 through 6, it is the second consecutive top 10 class for Coach Brady Hoke. And again, if you don't say anything else about this class, you can say that Coach Hoke knows where the needs are, and he and the coaching staff did an outstanding job.
Not only did they fill needs, but they filled them with very good prospects, especially, when you flip over to the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line class is probably the best in the country. So, fans got a little disappointed towards the end of the recruiting cycle to see that, by a lot of measures, Ohio State and Notre Dame had passed Michigan's class, but we're talking about very small degrees here in terms of the differences in these classes. at that point, what's going to be the much bigger impact as to how they turn out is how they're coached once they get to campus, and who they're surrounded by who's already on the team. So I think Michigan class is right up there with just about any in the country, and that's about as much as you can ask for.
Well, Ace, I hope you get a couple of weeks off before the commitments start rolling in for 2014, and we look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Mike. It's always a pleasure.
Coming up next is Wolverine Quick Hits as we wrap it up for another week here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. On Wolverine Quick Hits today, for the third time this season, University of Michigan men's basketball sophomore guard Trey Burke has been named the Big Ten's Player of the Week, as announced by the conference office on Monday. Burke capped off another strong week of play as he averaged 23.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 2.5 steals per game. He also shot 59.3% from the field, 16 for 27, while shooting 66.7% from long range, 6 for 9, and 90% from the free throw line, 9 for 10. The Wolverines will be off until Sunday when they face Illinois inside Chrysler Center. Tip-off is slated for 1 p.m., and the game will be televised on ESPN. The Wolverines fell to number 7 in this week's poll, heading into the weekend's action, so another big game at home this Sunday afternoon. In front of a season-high 5,800 fans, the University of Michigan women's basketball team outlasted in-state rival Michigan State to claim its third straight victory, 70-69, on Saturday afternoon at Chrysler Center. The Maize and Blue relied on a career-high 24 points from senior guard Jenny Ryan to help snap a 12-game losing streak against the Spartans. Two other Wolverines were in double figures, including senior guard Kate Thompson, with 20 points on 7 of 12 shooting from the floor, while senior forward Nia Jordan scored 12 points and grabbed 7 rebounds. For the game, Michigan shot 49.1%, 26 of 53 from the field, while MSU connected on 51.9%, 28 of 54 of its shots. Michigan outscored the Spartans 36-18 in the paint, and MSU won the Battle of the Boards 32-27. Michigan remains at Chrysler Center for its next contest tomorrow night, Thursday, against Nebraska. Tip-off will be at 7 p.m. The Wolverines now 19-6 overall, 8-4 in the Big Ten. The 14th-ranked University of Michigan softball team scored 17 runs in 2 frames to come up with a pair of victories on Sunday, first run ruling Massachusetts 13-2 in 5 innings before doubling up Florida Atlantic at FAU softball field. Michigan finished the tournament 3-1, defeating Maryland on Saturday, along with Massachusetts and Florida Atlantic. The Maize and Blue dropped a 2-1 game to LIU Brooklyn on Sunday. Michigan returns to the Diamond this weekend for 2 games in the NFCA Leadoff Classic in Clearwater, Florida, against Louisiana Lafayette and Illinois State. In all, the Wolverines will play 5 games in the tournament this weekend. Again, Michigan off to a great start. They're up to number 14 in the polls with a 6-2 record. In baseball news, 7 innings of 1-run ball from freshman Evan Hill from Mount Pleasant in his first collegiate start were not enough as the University of Michigan baseball team suffered its 3rd straight walk-off loss to Cal 2-1 on Sunday at Evans Diamond in Berkeley. After U of M plated a run in the top of the 8th to tie the score, Brian Chelsea's bases-loaded single to right in the bottom of the 9th ended it. The game was tied at 1 headed into the bottom of the 9th. Pinch hitter Brendan Farney walked to lead off the inning and moved to second on a sacrifice bunt from Mitchell Cranston. Devin Pearson then walked to put runners on first and second. A wild pitch moved both runners up 90 feet, and Michigan elected to load the bases by intentionally walking Mike Ruvenkamp. Chelsea then took junior Jay Perry's first pitch through the right side of the infield for a walk-off win. Patrick Biondi had 2 hits and walked twice on the day. Michigan left 10 men on base, while Cal left 9 runners stranded. The Wolverines will open a 3-game series with Fordham this Friday at Tradition Field in Port St. Lucie. The first pitch is at 2 p.m. The University of Michigan Athletic Department held a 25th induction ceremony for the Hall of Honor on Saturday on the Lozier-Tauber Court at the William Davidson Player Development Center. U of M alumna Dana Jacobson emceed the ceremony, honoring swimmer Gustavo Borge, football standout Rob Lytle, and hockey player Brendan Morrison. The trio elevated this elite group of Hall of Honor honorees to 202 inductees. A video featuring each recipient was shown prior to an interview with Jacobson. Borge and Morrison talked about their time at Michigan, their favorite places in Ann Arbor, and their professional careers in athletics. Inducted posthumously, Lytle was represented by his son Kelly and former teammates Jerry Zuver and Greg Meyer. The evening ended with Athletic Director Dave Brandon presenting each of the inductees with their Crystal Hall of Honor Award. So a fitting and classy conclusion to a big weekend in Ann Arbor. There is just so much going on this time of year, it is hard to keep up with. If you become a member here at GBMW, we make it easier for you to get your Wolverine news and conversation all in one place. So visit www.gbmwolverine.com and sign up for membership today. Give us a try. If you're a die-hard Wolverine fan that can't get enough Wolverine news, this is the place for you. So take a few minutes to sign up at www.gbmwolverine.com and join the fun. If you get the show weekly on your Apple device, the folks at iTunes would like to hear from you, good, bad, or indifferent. Just leave a comment with your thoughts on the show. Your feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thanks to our guest today, recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog. Ace does a fabulous job covering recruiting year-round, so check out Ace, Brian, and all of the guys over at MGoBlog. That's at www.mgoblog.com. Next week, it's back to Hoops Talk. We hope to be joined by basketball beat writer Mark Snyder from the Detroit Free Press, so we hope you will be back for that. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Thanks for taking time from your day to listen to the show, and I hope again that you'll be back next week. Until then, have a great Wolverine week, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!